The room was designed to intimidate without raising its voice. Floor-to-ceiling glass curved around the table long enough to feel like distance itself, polished so smooth it reflected faces back at themselves. The city sat below like a model made for people who never walked its streets. Morning light spilled in clean and white, the kind that made expensive suits look sharper and tired eyes look important. Chairs filled one by one. Papers were arranged with deliberate precision. A leather folder lay open at the center, a single page waiting. The number printed at the top carried more weight than the entire building beneath it. $5 billion, spelled out carefully, as if clarity could tame something that large. At the head of the table, the man everyone deferred to leaned back slightly, fingers laced, listening without urgency. He had learned long ago that silence often sounded like confidence. Around him, voices moved through rehearsed certainty. Projections were referenced. Risks were framed as opportunities. Words like synergy and scalability floated easily, unchallenged. Near the far wall, a woman guided a mop across the floor in slow, controlled arcs. She had timed it that way on purpose. Fast movements drew attention. Slow ones were dismissed as background. Her uniform hung loose on her frame, the fabric softened by too many washes. The soles of her sneakers whispered against the marble, a sound no one registered. She kept her eyes lowered, but her ears were open. They always were. She had arrived before sunrise, after packing a lunch that wouldn't spill and folding a note into a backpack she'd leave by the door at home. The note was a reminder for a school trip deposit she still hadn't figured out how to cover. The morning had been like most mornings, quiet urgency layered over exhaustion, but something about today had pressed heavier on her chest since she stepped onto the elevator. A voice cut through the room, smooth and assured, explaining how the acquisition would future-proof infrastructure. Heads nodded. A pen rolled between fingers. Someone chuckled at a light joke meant to relieve tension that didn't really exist. The woman paused her mop for a fraction of a second when a slide flicked to the encryption framework. She recognized the structure immediately, not from rumor or guesswork, but from memory etched in long nights and whiteboards that never quite erased clean. Her hand tightened around the handle. She told herself to keep moving. Another voice spoke, confident, dismissive of edge cases. We've stress-tested the pipeline. No vulnerabilities. The mop slid forward again, but slower now. She told herself it wasn't her place. She had learned that lesson well. It was reinforced in looks that slid past her, in conversations that never paused when she entered a room, in the way people spoke more freely when they thought no one important was listening. She was good at being invisible. It kept the job steady. A signature pen was placed beside the folder. Her heart began to beat louder than the room. She saw it then, clear as if it were projected on the glass itself, the clause buried in careful language, the mirrored routing path disguised as redundancy, the subtle transfer of control that would never be noticed until it was already being used. She had seen it before, dressed up in different words, sold by different smiles. It always ended the same way. Her mouth went dry. She took a step back, then another, as if distance could undo what she knew. The mop bucket bumped softly against the wall. The sound was small, but it snapped something tight inside her. The pen was lifted. She didn't plan the words. They came out because they had nowhere else to go. Please, she said. The word landed wrong in the room. Too soft. Too human. Several heads turned, surprised more than annoyed. A few brows creased. The man at the head of the table didn't look up yet. She swallowed. Her voice shook once, then steadied as if it had made a decision of its own. Don't sign the $5 billion deal. Silence fell in uneven pieces. Someone laughed, sharp and short, the way people do when they think something absurd has just happened and they want everyone else to agree. Excuse me? A woman near the middle of the table said, blinking. A man scoffed openly. Is this some kind of protest? The woman with the mop felt heat rush to her face, but she didn't look away. She had already crossed the line that mattered. Retreat wouldn't erase it. The man at the head of the table finally raised his eyes. They were calm, unreadable, assessing the interruption like a variable he hadn't planned for. "This is a closed meeting," he said evenly. "I know," she replied. "I'm sorry." A chair scraped as someone shifted. "Security," another voice muttered, not quite under their breath. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She could picture the hallway outside, the quiet efficiency with which she would be escorted out, the email that would follow by noon. She could picture her son asking why she was home early again. She forced herself to continue. "The encryption clause," she said quickly. "The routing. It gives them root access during peak load." That earned another laugh, louder this time. "She's reading headlines," someone said. She shook her head. "I'm reading the structure." The man at the head of the table leaned forward slightly now, interest flickering where irritation might have been expected. "You've had access to confidential documents?" "No," she said. "I listen. And I understand what I hear." That drew a few eye rolls. A director leaned back, folding his arms. "Ma'am, do you have any idea where you are?" "Yes," she said. "And that's why I'm scared you won't see it." The pen hovered over the paper. Security appeared at the edge of the room, hands clasped, waiting for a signal. She looked at the pen, then at the glass walls, then back at the man who could end this with a nod. Her hands were trembling now, but her voice stayed clear. "Once you sign, the leverage isn't theoretical. It's contractual." The legal counsel frowned. "That's enough." The man at the head of the table didn't move his pen. "Let her finish," he said. A murmur rippled across the table. Surprise, irritation, disbelief, all of it mixed together. She took a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "The mirror node isn't just for redundancy. It's a control point. They can throttle traffic under the guise of stability. You won't notice until you're dependent." Someone snapped. "You're a janitor." She nodded. "I am." The word hung there, heavy with everything it implied. She felt it press against her ribs, but she didn't let it crush her. "And before that, I worked in systems." Laughter again, but thinner now, edged with uncertainty. The man at the head of the table studied her face, the calluses on her hands, the way she stood like someone used to bracing against impact. "Explain," he said. The room leaned in despite itself. She opened her mouth, knowing that whatever came next would decide everything, knowing there was no script for this moment, and no way to make it safe. The silence that followed felt brittle, like it might shatter if anyone moved too fast. A few people exchanged glances that carried more calculation than curiosity now. The interruption was no longer amusing. It was inconvenient. Dangerous, even. Security took another step forward. The woman noticed the movement out of the corner of her eye and instinctively shifted her weight, placing the mop between herself and the men in dark jackets as if it could serve as a barrier. Her palms were damp. She wiped one discreetly against her pant leg. "Sir," a voice said carefully, angled toward the head of the table. "We really can't allow." "Give me a moment," came the reply, quiet but firm. That stopped the advance. Not because the guards respected the woman with the mop, but because they respected the authority that had spoken. She knew the difference, and it burned in a place she didn't have time to acknowledge. A man near the far end leaned forward, irritation etched into his face. "This is absurd. We're minutes from finalizing a deal that's been vetted for months. We're going to derail it because someone overheard a few buzzwords." She shook her head. "I didn't overhear buzzwords." "Oh?" Another voice cut in. "Then what did you overhear? Source code?" A ripple of restrained laughter passed through the room. She felt it like static against her skin. "I overheard confidence," she said. "The kind that comes from knowing no one thinks you matter." That landed differently. The laughter thinned, replaced by something sharper. "Watch your tone," the legal counsel snapped. She met his eyes, surprised by how steady her gaze felt now. "I've been watching yours for months." That drew a few raised eyebrows. The man at the head of the table raised a hand slightly. "You said peak load," he prompted. "Explain why that matters." She inhaled slowly, forcing her thoughts into order. Under normal traffic, the system behaves exactly as advertised. Clean. Efficient. But when demand spikes, the control handoff shifts. Not permanently. Just enough to remind you who owns the gate. A director scoffed. You're describing extortion. I'm describing leverage, she replied. It only looks like extortion when you're already trapped. The chief technology officer frowned, tapping a finger against his tablet. We ran simulations. Yes, she said. With their test keys. The room stilled. The CTO's fingers paused. That's not, he began, then stopped. He looked down at the screen again, scrolling faster now. His jaw tightened. The woman noticed the change and felt a flicker of grim validation. She pressed on. They reuse encryption patterns. Slightly modified. Enough to pass audits. Not enough to be safe when mirrored. You're speculating, someone said, but there was less confidence in it now. I'm recognizing a pattern, she said. One I helped design before I knew better. That caught the attention of the man at the head of the table. You designed something like this? She hesitated. This was the edge she'd been afraid of. I did. A sharp laugh came from the right. And let me guess. The industry just didn't appreciate your genius. Her chest tightened. My team warned them. We were told to optimize, not moralize. The room shifted uncomfortably. No one liked hearing about warnings ignored. It hit too close to their own histories. Security cleared his throat. Sir, this is getting personal. It already is, she said quietly. For all of us. The legal counsel leaned back, steepling his fingers. Let's be clear. You're asking us to believe that a multi-billion-dollar firm hid a control mechanism that our own experts missed. And you want us to believe that because you cleaned this floor? She nodded. I want you to believe it because it's true. A woman near the middle of the table looked conflicted. If you're wrong, I lose my job, she finished. If I'm right, you lose your independence. That silenced the objections more effectively than any argument could have. The man at the head of the table stood slowly. The chair legs whispered against the floor. Everyone watched him, searching his face for a cue. He walked a few steps closer to the glass, looking out over the city, hands clasped behind his back. Why didn't you come to someone sooner? He asked without turning. She swallowed. Because I don't have a badge that opens those doors. He turned then, studying her with new intensity. And you thought interrupting a signing was better? She met his gaze. I thought it was my last chance. A murmur passed through the room. The chief of staff leaned in toward another executive, whispering urgently. Phones were unlocked now, screens glowing discreetly. The CTO looked up, eyes narrowed. There was an anomaly, he said slowly. 3 weeks ago. During a regional surge. The legal counsel snapped his head around. We attributed that to maintenance, the CTO finished. But the timestamps. He scrolled again, then looked up at the woman. You're saying that wasn't a glitch? She nodded. It was a test. The room felt smaller suddenly. The glass walls no longer looked expansive. They looked exposed. A director stood. This is spiraling. We need to proceed or adjourn. The man at the head of the table walked back to his chair. He didn't sit. We pause, he said. The word dropped like a weight. The pen was set down deliberately. Security relaxed, uncertain now. The legal counsel opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again when he saw the look on the CEO's face. The woman exhaled shakily, only now realizing how tightly she'd been holding herself together. Her knees felt weak. She leaned subtly against the mop handle for support. You, the man said, addressing her directly. What's your name? She said it softly. He nodded once. You understand that if this turns out to be nothing. I understand, she said. I've understood worse. He studied her for another moment, then turned to the room. Initiate an independent audit. Now. No vendor access. Full load simulation. The room erupted into controlled chaos. Calls were placed. Instructions were given. The meeting that had been meant to last 10 minutes stretched into something far more volatile. No one laughed anymore. As the momentum shifted, the woman became acutely aware of where she stood, still by the wall, still holding a mop, still one misstep away from being escorted out once her usefulness expired. The adrenaline that had carried her through the interruption began to ebb, replaced by fear sharp enough to sting. She watched the pen on the table, untouched. The man at the head of the table looked at her again, something unreadable in his expression. "You may stay," he said. It wasn't permission. It was a test. She nodded, saying nothing, knowing that the real danger hadn't passed yet. The deal wasn't dead. It was suspended, hovering in the balance along with her future. And somewhere deep beneath the polished surface of the room, a truth was beginning to press upward, demanding to be seen whether they were ready for it or not. The room no longer felt controlled. It felt awake. Conversations overlapped in low, urgent tones, the kind people used when they were trying not to sound afraid. Screens filled with graphs and logs. The neat confidence that had opened the morning unraveled into something more honest and far less comfortable. She stood where she was, afraid to move, afraid that if she stepped out of line the spell would break and she would be escorted away before the truth finished speaking for her. Her hands still gripped the mop handle, though she no longer remembered when she tightened them. Her shoulders ached from holding herself so rigidly, but she didn't relax. Not yet. The chief technology officer swiped through data faster now, fingers precise, jaw clenched. "This shouldn't be happening," he muttered. "The fallback shouldn't trigger under synthetic load unless..." He stopped mid-sentence. Unless it was designed to. The realization crossed his face before he said a word. It was subtle, but she recognized it immediately. She had worn that same expression years ago, when she realized the thing she'd helped build wasn't broken. It was obedient. "You see it?" she said quietly. Several heads snapped toward her. The CTO looked up slowly. "There's a conditional override," he said. "Buried deep. It reroutes authority during congestion. It's elegant." "Elegant lies are still lies," she replied. A director leaned forward. "How could we miss that?" "Because it's not malicious in isolation," she said. "It only becomes dangerous when you're dependent on it." The legal counsel rubbed his temples. "This changes our exposure. It changes who holds the switch," she said. The man at the head of the table had been silent, watching everything with unnerving focus. He spoke now, measured. "You said you helped design something like this?" She nodded. Her throat felt tight, but she didn't look away. "Years ago. Different company. Same promise. Total resilience. And it failed," he said. "Yes," she answered. "And before it did, I tried to stop it." The room quieted again, this time not from command but from attention. "I was part of a team that believed optimization solved everything," she continued. "We thought control meant stability. We were wrong. Control without consent becomes coercion the moment the stakes rise." The CTO leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling for a moment. "They can choke us. They can steer you," she said. Slowly. Quietly. "When you're already locked in." Phones buzzed softly as messages came in from auditors being looped into emergency reviews. One screen displayed a live simulation beginning to spike. The man at the head of the table walked closer, stopping a few feet from her. "Why didn't you expose this sooner? Publicly?" She laughed once, bitter and short. "Who would have listened?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. A woman on the board spoke up, voice tight. "If this is confirmed, the deal is dead." "And if it's not?" another asked. "Then I go back to cleaning," she said. "And you sign." The simplicity of it hung in the air. No theatrics. No bargaining. Just consequence. The simulation graph spiked sharply, then dipped, then spiked again. The CTO's eyes widened. "It's triggering," he said. "Under load." A hush fell. Someone swore under their breath. She felt her knees threaten to give out, relief and dread colliding in her chest. Being right didn't feel triumphant. It felt heavy. She had hoped she was wrong, even as she'd spoken. The man at the head of the table exhaled slowly. If we hadn't paused, you would have signed away leverage you didn't know you needed, she finished. He nodded once. Why take this risk? He asked softly. You knew what it would cost you. She looked at the glass walls again, at the city below. Because once you sign something like that, it doesn't just hurt companies. It hurts people who never get a seat at tables like this. His gaze sharpened. Explain. She hesitated, then spoke. When systems fail quietly, the consequences fall downward. Jobs disappear. Service is slow. Blame gets redirected. The people who clean up afterward don't get stock options. A long pause followed. The board members shifted uncomfortably. It was one thing to discuss technical risk. It was another to confront moral fallout. The CTO cleared his throat. The override is keyed to a reuse pattern, he said. If someone knew what to look for. Her eyes flicked to him. They'd recognize it. He studied her more carefully now, not as an intruder but as a peer he hadn't known was in the room. Where did you learn to see that? She took a breath. In rooms like this, she said. Before I learned who gets blamed when decisions go wrong. The room absorbed that quietly. A phone rang. The man at the head of the table answered it himself, listening intently. He said nothing for a long moment, then ended the call. Audit confirms it, he said. The words rippled outward, changing the air itself. One director sank back into his chair. Another stared at the table, knuckles white. The legal counsel spoke carefully now. We need to prepare for retaliation. We need to prepare to walk away, the man replied. Publicly. A murmur of agreement followed, subdued but real. He turned back to her. You understand what you've done? She nodded. I interrupted power. He smiled faintly. You reminded us where it actually sits. Security, who had been hovering uncertainly, stepped back another pace, no longer sure who they were meant to remove. The CTO closed his tablet and looked at her. You said you tried to stop this before? She met his eyes. I failed. Not this time, he said. She wanted to believe that. She really did. The man at the head of the table straightened. We're not signing, he announced to the room. Not today. Not ever. A breath went through the space like a wave breaking. Relief mixed with fear, but beneath it all was clarity. He looked at her again, something resolute in his expression now. You didn't just save us money, he said. You saved us from a choice we would have regretted. Her fingers loosened their grip on the mop for the first time since she'd spoken. The meeting shifted toward damage control, press statements, contingency planning. Voices were calmer now, but the weight of what had nearly happened lingered. She stood quietly, unsure whether to leave or wait to be dismissed. Her role, whatever it had become, felt undefined. The man caught her hesitation. Stay, he said. We're not finished. She nodded, heart pounding again, realizing that the most difficult part wasn't proving the truth. It was waiting to see what they would do with it. The building looked different at night. Without the sharp edge of morning light, the glass softened, reflecting the city in long streaks of gold and blue. The executive floor was quieter now, but not calm. It carried the aftershock of decisions that could not be undone. She sat in a chair she hadn't been invited to that morning, hands folded in her lap, the mop leaned neatly against the wall beside her. It felt strange to be seated at all. Stranger still to be noticed. People who had barely looked at her hours earlier now glanced her way with something like respect, or at least caution, as they passed. Phones continued to buzz. Lawyers moved in and out. Drafts were rewritten. Statements were edited until they said just enough truth to protect the future without igniting unnecessary fires. The deal that had seemed inevitable before noon now felt radioactive. Across the room, the man who had stopped the signing stood at the window again, listening as two board members argued quietly behind him. He didn't interrupt. He waited until their voices fell away on their own. "We'll need to notify shareholders," one said. "We'll need to explain why," said another. "We'll need a scapegoat," a third muttered, not realizing she could hear. She lowered her eyes, the old instinct tugging at her. Stay small. Stay invisible. Let it pass. But it didn't pass. The man turned from the window. "No," he said calmly. "We don't." The room stilled. "We tell the truth," he continued. "We almost signed away control. We stopped. That's the story." The board member frowned. "That makes us look careless." "It makes us look capable of learning," he replied. "There's a difference." Silence followed, then reluctant nods. No one argued further. He walked toward her, then unhurried. She felt every step like a drumbeat. When he stopped in front of her, he didn't tower. He crouched slightly so they were eye level. "You said earlier that people without seats pay the price," he said. "You were right." She didn't respond. She wasn't sure what the correct response was anymore. He straightened and addressed the room. "The audit, the pause, the withdrawal, none of that happens without her." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Others looked thoughtful. One or two looked ashamed. "She doesn't leave tonight with a thank you," he continued. "She leaves with options." Her breath caught. The legal counsel cleared his throat. "We'll need to be careful about doing the right thing," the man cut in. "For once." He turned back to her. "You shouldn't have had to risk your job to be heard." She finally spoke. "I didn't know another way." "That's on us," he said. "Not you." A folder was placed on the table, not the one with the $5 billion signature line, but something simpler. Inside were documents she recognized instantly, even before reading them. An offer. A role. Access. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. "I don't have," she began. "You have exactly what we're missing," he said. "Perspective." She looked up, eyes shining despite herself. "I have a kid," she said quietly. "I can't gamble." He nodded. "Neither can we." The room watched as she read, every line grounding her further in the reality of it. The salary figure made her swallow hard. The benefits section blurred for a moment. "I don't want to be a symbol," she said at last. "Good," he replied. "We need a system." A laugh escaped her before she could stop it, shaky and disbelieving. For the first time that day, the tension in her chest eased. By the time she left the building, the city had settled into a low hum. The elevator ride down felt unreal, like stepping out of a storm into sudden quiet. In the lobby, she paused, looking at her reflection in the polished metal doors. Same uniform. Same tired eyes. But something fundamental had shifted behind them. At home, her son was already asleep, one arm flung over the blanket, his backpack slumped against the wall where she'd left it that morning. She sat on the edge of the bed and watched him breathe, the weight of the day finally crashing over her. She didn't wake him. She didn't need to. Tomorrow would explain itself. The story broke 2 days later. Headlines framed it as a narrow escape, a bold pause, a leadership decision that saved billions. Buried deeper, almost as an afterthought, was mention of an internal whistleblower who had raised concerns minutes before signing. Her phone buzzed constantly. Former colleagues reached out. Some apologized. Some asked for help. One message simply said, "I'm glad someone listened." When she returned to the building, it was through a different entrance. Her badge opened doors that had once stayed closed. People greeted her by name now. Some with warmth. Some with caution. Power had shifted, and everyone felt it. She passed the janitorial closet on her way to her new office. The door was open, supplies neatly stacked, the smell of cleaner familiar and grounding. For a moment, she stood there, remembering the rhythm of the mop, the way invisibility had once felt like safety. Then she turned away. Weeks later, the vendor's leverage scheme became public through an unrelated investigation. The fallout was swift. Contracts dissolved. Executives resigned. Lawsuits followed. The market reacted sharply, then stabilized. Inside the company, something quieter but more profound took hold. Reviews changed. Meetings slowed. People listened more carefully to voices that hadn't carried weight before. One afternoon, as she walked past the boardroom, she saw the same table, the same chairs, the same glass walls. The signature pen sat in its holder, unused. She didn't stop. That evening, as she picked up her son from school, he ran toward her, waving a permission slip. "Did you sign it?" he asked. She smiled and took the paper. "I will," she said. "I just wanted to read it carefully first." He grinned, satisfied. As they walked home together, the city lights flickered on one by one, and she realized that the most powerful thing she'd done wasn't stopping a deal. It was proving that the quietest voice in the room could still change everything, if someone chose to listen.